everybody, welcome again to another exciting episode of the Crowdsourced Politics News Roundup. I am your host and moderator, Cypher, and today we have a lot to talk about, a lot of bad things to talk about. And it's not going to be fun, and I'm probably going to actually get kind of dark and a little bit of angry. You saw the tweet, you know. Now, before we get into the news roundup, let me make some announcements. First up on the announcements list is that on June 7th at 8:30, at 9:30, I'm sorry, 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard. Actually, let me double check that. I operate in Central Time, and I don't recall the time she said. So, okay. 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Okay. So at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on June 7th, that is Tuesday, June 7th, we will be conducting an interview for the Praxis Run podcast with K Fellows. People on this show may know K Fellows, but for those that do not know, K Fellows is a person that has done a lot of debates on the debate circuit and is pro-life from the left. And so we're going to be interviewing her as part of our Praxis Run series. And for those that don't know what Praxis Run is a podcast dedicated to understanding people's different positions and understand how they put their own theory into action, otherwise known, or practice, otherwise known as praxis. So be sure to be on the lookout for that on wherever you get your podcast. But if you want to watch it live and get your questions answered, you can participate with that by watching it on this channel, which is Twitch, YouTube, or currently still Facebook. So we'll be interviewing K Fellows on that. And then we also will be starting Cypher State up again next month. And Cypher State is a foreign affairs and foreign policy focused podcast where we bring in people of different political background stripes and expertise, whether in academia, in business, or foreign affairs, and interview them and take their knowledge to impart knowledge upon you about a particular geopolitical issue that is facing the world stage today. So be sure to be on the lookout for that. We typically do that on the third Sunday of every month, and we're going to be starting that back up next month as well. So without further ado, though, let's get into the news. All right, let's get into it. So we'll begin tonight with a brief update on Russia's war on Ukraine, and it's on its 92nd day. So first up is Zelensky responding to the New York Times editorial board and Kissinger. So the New York Times editorial board published an opinion piece this week that sure sounded like they're pushing for appeasement in Ukraine, even as they insisted it wasn't appeasement at all. The article slammed the Biden administration for not having clear boundaries for how far the U.S. would go in supporting Ukraine. The editorial board suggested that Ukraine's insistence that it will not back down until all the territory Russia has taken since 2014 is returned to a free Ukraine will never happen. Therefore, the editorial board said the U.S. should be managing Ukraine's expectations and preparing for yielding more territory to Russia. Henry Kissinger weighed in at the Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. Kissinger said that the West should stop trying to inflict a crushing defeat on Russia and suggested that Ukraine should give up some of its territory. He said they should begin negotiations, quote, before it creates upheavals and tensions that will not easily be overcome. Continuing on, he said, ideally, the dividing line should be a return to the status quo ante. Pushing the war beyond that point would not be about the freedom of Ukraine, but a new war against Russia itself, he told a conference on Monday. The response from Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky was immediate and scornful. Quote, it seems that Mr. Kissinger's calendar is not 2022, but 1938, and he thought he was talking to an audience not in Davos, but in Munich of that time, he said, referring to the appeasement of Nazi Third Reich in Germany. By the way, In the year 1938, when Mr. Kissinger's family was fleeing Nazi Germany, he was 15 years old, and he understood everything perfectly. And nobody heard from him then. It was not necessary to adapt to and nobody heard from him that it was necessary to adapt to the Nazis instead of fleeing them or fighting them. Referring to the New York Times editorial, President Zelensky said, quote, symptomatic editorials began to appear in some Western countries' media, stating that Ukraine must allegedly accept so-called difficult compromises by giving up territory in exchange for peace. Perhaps the New York Times in 1938 also wrote something similar, but now, let me remind you, it is 2022. Now, on Wednesday, Zelensky reiterated those remarks that Ukraine wouldn't agree to peace until Russia agreed to return Crimea and the Donbas region to Ukraine. The West continues to support Ukraine's sovereignty and confirmed that Putin will not dictate the terms of peace. Now, for people that may not know much about Kissinger, Kissinger was Nixon's Secretary of State and very much a war hawk to push American interest overseas, especially in Southeast Asia, navigated the whole communist block, that exists in Southeast Asia as well as Russia. What likely Kissinger is saying here is that, according to him and his realist outlook. And realism is a foreign policy lens in which you try to treat governments as individual actors with needs, wants, and desires. And you try to navigate those needs, wants, and desires to your own personal end. And him saying this, he's basically saying by not giving Putin a way out to save face, and we are looking to just punish Putin and not deal with the realities, and that could lead to a long, protracted war. All right, I got a little thing. And he may not be entirely wrong about that, but given his past history and his statements and everything like that, his books on world order and the like, you would think that he would be much more agreeable to the idea that Ukraine should get as much of its territory back as possible. Maybe this is what happens in old age. People get a little more risk adverse, for lack of a better term, and maybe he is worried that this will turn into a grander war than what it actually is. So it's probably to do a little bit of that. Oh, okay, it is mirrored wrong. There we go. So, yeah, I think that's what he's doing here. And I don't know. I don't entirely disagree with his assessment, but I do disagree with the implications of that assessment, as well as the fact that it does appear that Russia is largely losing. People are saying that Russia is trying to cement its territorial gains in the eastern region of Donbas and as well as Crimea, and that they only tried to go into western Ukraine in order to cut off supply routes and troops from getting back into eastern Ukraine. But as long as the Ukrainians are able to keep up a fight, and as long as they are making territorial gains, and as long as they're inflicting large cost to Russia for its it's a war of aggression. Invasions are usually always illegal. It's aggression. Which is evil. Let's be real about that. Then there's no reason to do any form of appeasement whatsoever, because they could, in actuality, take that territory back. So Zelensky is 100% right about this, and his use of relying on Nazi Germany to poke Western countries, as well as it being a very good critique of this appeasement strategy is very effective. I think it's one of the best things he could have said about this, and that is why he is, well, let's be real, he's honestly a pretty decent fucking leader for this. He's done his country proud. Now, but let's continue on. Now, according to the Associated Press, the US will close the last avenue for Russia to pay back its billions in debt to international investors on Wednesday. This makes Russia's default on its debt for the first time since the Bolshevik Revolution all but inevitable. The Treasury Department said in a notification Tuesday that it does not plan to renew the license to allow Russia to keep paying its debtors through American banks. The license applied to American investors and international investors who have dollar-denominated debt or bonds. The Russian finance minister said it will pay in rubles and offer, quote, the opportunity for subsequent conversions into the original currency. The ministry didn't give a time frame for that to happen. And what they're basically saying here is that we'll pay you in rubles. The ruble's doing well. And you can convert it into dollars through us. Maybe we'll just give you more oil, more gas, and we'll just call it a day. Now, will that fly? Given the fact that Europe is still buying oil and gas from Russia, hate to say it, but it probably will. Russia has a large amount of leverage over Western Europe because of its reliance on its natural gas and oil. This is part of the problem where oh, Jesus Christ, my brain today. Merkel, there we go. Angela Merkel had taken down some of the nuclear reactors, and as well as not doing its own natural gas exploration, which basically made it reliant on Russia to export its gas to Europe, Germany specifically. And as long as that's the case, as long as the United States or another country is not able to fill that gap in its energy needs, this will continue to happen. And Vladimir Zelensky had said that on one hand, the Europeans are giving Ukraine arms and showing that they are standing up for the sovereignty of a country against the aggression. But on the other hand, they're buying oil and gas in the millions of euros and essentially giving Russia its ability to fund its war. And he's right. And this is why the reliance on natural gas and oil is also a security risk. And that's why the world needs to transfer over to different energy sources. And some of that can include nuclear power, wind power, dams, hydroelectric, whatever, and move from burning gas and oil for heat to creating more boiler systems that use energy from other sources to heat the boiler systems to provide heat, especially in the winter. Will that happen anytime soon? No. And the hope is that since it is getting warmer in Europe, the amount of gas and oil that Europe will buy from Russia will decrease. And with that decrease will come less money into Russian hands, which will put more pressure and strain on it. But that is only up until the winter comes, or just before the winter comes, where the reality of the situation is going to make it to where Europe is going to buy more gas and oil from Russia. So it sucks. But that's the reality. And that's what we have to deal with here. Now, continuing on, there have been newly declassified U.S. intelligence that a Russia naval blockade has halted maritime trade at Ukrainian ports. Let's take a look at a map of that. Now, as you can see on this map, let me go ahead and make it bigger. Oops, wrong one. Go. Make it bigger, zoom in a bit. So as you can see, based on this map and this legend here, we're seeing a large blockade of Ukrainian ports by Russia. And what this means is that there isn't going to be any export of wheat or any kind of grain out of Ukraine. So world leaders are calling this a deliberate attack on the global food supply chain that has raised fears of political instability and shortages unless that grain and other essential agricultural products are allowed to flow freely from Ukraine. In a call to the Prime Minister of Italy, Russia President Vladimir Putin demanded that the West lift the sanctions against this country if it wants Moscow to help ease the global food crisis. Putin is trying to shift the blame for growing global food crisis from his war, evil fucking war in Ukraine, to Europeans and the West in general. And he's being able to do this because he has leverage here, because the West is not doing anything to stop him other than give arms to Ukraine. Right? There has been no move of US, French, UK, German naval forces into the Black Sea, the Baltic Seas. And that is a problem because it allowed Russia to do this. Now, Kyiv is unable to ship millions of tons of grain and other agricultural products because of the conflict. Britain immediately accused Moscow of, quote, trying to hold the world ransom and insisted there would be no sanction relief. Britain is correct about this, but again, it's another way for Russia, for Putin specifically, to have leverage over the rest of the world. An interdependence of global trade, of some countries being able to grow food and others not being able to grow the food that they need to feed their people, is why this can happen. Now, the United States is, quote unquote, the bread basket of the world. We export way more food than we consume. Tons of grain, tons of everything. But when it comes to international food and trade, or international food sources, Russia and Ukraine make up about 20% of the global supply of grain. That's not going to be something that the United States alone can compensate. Can we compensate for a lot of it? Yes, we can compensate for a lot of it. But a full 20%? I don't think so. And that's going to cause instability across the entire globe. Make no mistake, violent revolutions happen when people cannot eat. And they will place the blame on everybody involved. And that might include Western countries. Now the Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov tried to put the blame for the crisis squarely on Western sanctions. Again, misdirect, redirect. Quote, we accuse Western countries of taking a series of unlawful actions that has led to the blockade, he said in a conference call with reporters. This is because, let's be real, sanctions are war by other means. It's an economic form of warfare. Because if you're stopping trade, you're stopping the ability of a country to function, especially in a globally interdependent economy, which is what we have. And we've had that for 100 years at this point, more or less. Actually, probably longer than that. If you want to be technical, we've had a global interconnected economy since colonialism, since the great empires of Spain, UK, France, Belgium. All these countries existed and created colonial empires that were, for the most part, exporting natural resources from one area to another to enrich themselves. And the difference here is that this is preventing Russia from getting money, and therefore they're going to try to prevent anybody from getting food. It's a tit for tat situation. Can we blame Russia for this? Yes, absolutely. We can blame Russia for this. Because Russia, again, are the aggressors here. Full stop. 100% the aggressors. Make no mistake about it. They're the impotence of this. Putin is 100% responsible. At the same time, This should have been a very easy thing to predict. And if it's easy to predict, make some plans for. I do not know if we made plans for this. We being the amorphous we here, not just the United States, but the globe, okay? So I don't know if there's been plans made to counter this. But this is dangerous. Now, continuing on though, Russia itself is also a significant exporter of grain. And Peskov said the West, quote, must cancel the unlawful decision to hamper chartering ships and exporting grain. U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken noted last week that food, fertilizer, and seeds are exempt from sanctions imposed by the U.S. and many others, and that Washington is working to ensure countries know the flow of those goods should not be affected. But they don't care about that. Russia wants all its goods to be unaffected by sanctions. They want their people to not be sanctioned either. Because how does Putin maintain power? Through gifts and favors and other political wrangling in order to curry favor around the court that has built up around him. Calling this court like a kingly court is actually the best way to go, the best way to think about this. Putin is surrounded by a field of coteries, all looking to exploit one another in order to gain more favor with the king, which is Putin. And if they're not gaining favor and they're in disfavor, or if they are being punished for the actions that Putin is taking, putting and making Russia do, then they might turn on him. Because everybody that is there fancies themselves as having the same ability to lead the country as everyone else. But because they're gaining whatever, money, fame, power, what have you, then they're happy with the status quo. But if the status quo goes away, maybe they won't be so happy anymore, and maybe they'll rebel against Putin. Of course, Putin has his ability to use secret police and extrajudicial killings in order to force compliance, to force respect. But that can only go so far if he's not doing things to use what leverage he has to appease those courtiers. And that's why this is happening. Additionally, the Russian defense minister proposed Wednesday to open a corridor to allow foreign ships to leave the Black Sea ports and another to allow vessels to leave Mariupol on the Azov Sea. Ukraine expects skepticism about the Russian proposal. Now, it should also be noted that in negotiations, one of the best tactics to do in order to to get out of a dicey situation, and this has been proven by game theory running millions of simulations, computer simulations, and just logic, is called tit for tat with an olive branch. Planet Money did a very good podcast on this. And what the people that did the research on this showed is that if you're trying to win in a negotiation and also get out of a sticky situation, then you have to respond in kind. So if you're sanctioned, you have to sanction them, right? And it's just going to keep going back and forth, right? But eventually, somebody can hold out an olive branch. And that olive branch can be used to build up goodwill and also make the person that gave the olive branch look better in the long run. And the proposal to open a corridor is one of those olive branches, is one of those things to be like, look, we're operating in good faith. Work with us. Drop the sanctions. If you drop the sanctions, hey, we're not going to go any further than eastern Ukraine. We're just going to take our territory. We're going to create this additional buffer zone. The million or so people we don't give a shit about. So you can't invade Russia. Just let us have it. Just let us have it. Right? That's what they're hoping for. So don't think that this is just some this is a show of good faith, but the goal of the show of good faith is still to cement its territorial gains in its evil war of aggression against Ukraine. That's what's going on here. And don't let them make you think otherwise. But with that wraps up our segment on the updates of Ukraine. So, hey everybody, welcome one and all. Hey, Mr. Saxo-Keat, appreciate you too, man. Thank you for joining the program. We like it when people say, hey, they like what we're doing. It's what we're doing for. So with that, hey, welcome everybody. If you're just now joining us, welcome to the Crowdsourced Politics News Roundup. I am Cypher, and we do this news roundup where we cover the news that was of the last week with the kind of analysis only the crowd can provide, from every Thursday from about 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to roughly 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So if this is something that you like, go ahead and, you know what? Go ahead, smash that like button, smash the follow button for the algorithms. It really does help us out. Again, we do other podcasts on this as well. We do Praxis Run, which is to explore how to put theory into practice or action, otherwise known as praxis, interviewing people from both the political right and political left in the United States. No racist though, and to understand people and maybe tamp down a little bit on the vitriol that we're all seeing here, and maybe to come to some common understanding and common ground to solve actual problems. So we're going to be doing another show for that on June 7th. We also do Cypher State, and Cypher State is a foreign affairs and foreign policy focused podcast where we cover a big geopolitical issue that's happening in the world with people from the political right, academics, political left, pundits, and the like from YouTube and Twitch. So be sure to be on the lookout for that. Now, we're going to continue on and talk about the news. And we're going to talk about China and Taiwan now. And this is important because this might have been a gaffe. We don't know. We don't know if it was intentional, if it was a slip of the tongue, if it's just accidentally saying the quiet part out loud. Wink, wink, nod, nod. But let's talk about it. So the Biden administration aims to lead the international bloc opposed to Russia's invasion of Ukraine into a broader coalition, according to the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken. This would provide a counter to what the administration sees as more serious long-term threat to the global order from China. Quote, even as President Putin's war continues, we will remain focused on the most serious long-term challenges to the international order, and that is one of the proposed by the People's Republic of China, Blinken had said. Continuing on, he said, China is the only country with both the intent to reshape the international order and increasingly the economic, diplomatic, military, and technological power to do so. Beijing's vision would move us away from universal values that have sustained so much of the world's progress over the last 75 years. Blinken made it clear that the U.S. does not seek to change China's political system. Instead, it wants to offer a tested alternative. Quote, we can't rely on Beijing to change its trajectory, Blinken said in a speech delivered at George Washington University. So we will shape the strategic environment around Beijing to advance our vision for an open, inclusive international system. Now, inclusive to a point, of course, right? Because this international system doesn't really want to respect autocrats or whatever the Chinese system you want to call it. So the speech followed President Joe Biden's just concluded visit to South Korea and Japan, where China loomed large in the discussion. During the trip, Biden said that the United States would act militarily to help Taiwan defend itself in the event of an invasion by China. Now, the administration scrambled to insist that Biden was not changing American policy, and Blinken restated that the U.S. has not changed its position. Blinken said that Washington still holds its one China policy, where it recognizes Beijing, but also allows for unofficial links with and arms sales to Taipei, the capital of Taiwan. Nevertheless, the Biden administration has accelerated its efforts to reshape the Taiwanese defense systems. Now, according to the New York Times, the U.S. now projects a more robust American military presence in the region to try to deter a potential attack by the Chinese military. Russia's war in Ukraine has made American and Taiwanese officials acutely aware that an autocrat can order an invasion of a neighboring territory at any moment. But it has also shown how a small military can hold out against a seemingly powerful foe, which was proven over the last 20 years with America's involvement in the Middle East. I mean, let's be real, a population that doesn't want a group of people in its territory, we'll be able to kick them out as long as they have arms. This is one of the things that the Second Amendment always and forever, which we'll get into later in the program, God fucking help us, is probably right about. Now, that isn't to say that it's one of those situations that a fucking AR-15 can take on an entire modern military. Because that's not what's happening in Ukraine, okay? What happened in Afghanistan, or what happened in Iraq. The forces in all of these countries have had larger weapons than just small arms. They've had RPGs. They've had, well, those are considered small arms too, but you get what I'm saying. They've had RPGs, grenades, rocket launchers, sometimes artillery, howitzers on the back of fucking pickup trucks, anti-aircraft missiles, anti-tank missiles, anti-aircraft guns, etc. So as long as you have those kind of weaponry, you can take on a modern military force for a while anyways. But if that military force is willing to be as brutal as, I don't know, the olden days back in when empires were won and lost by the charisma and strategic vision of a single man that just went in and basically like, all these people, murdered them all, fuck it, like God's thrown them out, right? If you're willing to do that, you're going to suppress a people pretty quickly. That's what history actually shows us. So, don't think that just because you're armed means you can sustain it. It matters how moral your enemy will fight its war. Now, continuing on though. US officials are taking lessons learned from arming Ukraine to work with Taiwan in molding a stronger force that could repel a seaborne invasion by China. And what should be noted is that we've given Taiwan batteries of anti-ship and anti-aircraft weaponry that are positioned all along the coast of Taiwan prior to this. So the aim is to turn Taiwan into what some officials call a porcupine, a territory bristling with armaments and other forms of US-led support that appears too painful to attack. Again, if you have a batteries of anti-tank or anti-aircraft, anti-ship weaponry all along the coast, and they're far range missiles or artillery or arms, and you get the military intelligence the US military can actually provide, you can sink hundreds of ships before they even get to you. Even with the little bit of ocean and water that exists between Taiwan and China proper. So yeah, that's what we're trying to do. And it could work. So now, the president asserted on Monday that the United States had a commitment to get involved militarily to defend Taiwan, the third time he made such remarks during his presidency. And this should be pretty much obvious to anybody that's been paying attention to all the shortages and everything that we've experienced over the last 2 years. Sorry, I got the burps a little bit. And the reason I say that is because Taiwan has been built up as a tech manufacturing hub and is one of the leading exporters, I should say, of computer chips. And we cannot strategically allow that to fall into the hands of China. So what we can do is, again, set up Taiwan to defend itself for a fairly long time, and also buttress it against Chinese propaganda and people that like to say, oh, China just wants to be our friend again, and we're actually Chinese, and they're good. Communism is based, brother. Yeah, there's people that say that on this fucking platform. Fuck those people. Yeah, I'm a little salty today. Not gonna lie. But, and while doing that, also make strategic investments into your own manufacturing hub in order to counter it should it happen, which is what we're doing. Now, President Biden has explicitly said that he would take measures that go beyond what the United States has done in Ukraine. While Beijing could see the words as belligerent, they are consistent with the new emphasis of Washington on forceful deterrence. And it's not that new. We had this pivot towards Asia under Obama, And that meant setting up not setting up military bases, increasing military presence in the South China Sea, giving allies ships, weapons, and the like to counter Chinese aggression in the South China Sea, making something movements, free sea movement operations within the South China Sea, which is where the international water. What that means is that free navigation movement. So what that means is that in the international waters that are part of the South China Sea, you do navigation exercises and war games out in those areas as a show of force, so to speak. A little bit of saber rattling, also a little bit of training, and to show, look, we're going to enforce our interest in this area, which is the global interest, to make sure that these shipping lanes remain open and that you're not stealing, you're not shutting them down, you're not creating problems for our allies, etc. So we've done all this stuff under Obama. This was like a good 8 years of a strategic pivot away from the Middle East towards China from a military strategic standpoint. And Biden is continuing that on and upping the ante a bit on it. Trump kind of continued Obama's policy to this a little bit, but there are some fair things that we have to give him have to say about that, because again, Obama was pulled back into the Middle East because of ISIS. Trump was there to kind of finish it off using Obama's plan. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Trump let the military continue the military's plan. It was developed under Obama, and basically said, I'm not going to get in the way, and that's why it worked. It was going to work even if Clinton won. All right, it's just the way long-term strategic planning works. It's not necessarily any one president's agenda that makes it work. Right? Dropping the mother of all bombs didn't scare the fuck out of anybody. Okay, it's just a giant bomb. Who cares? We see those every day, right? So those are those things, right? And Biden is continuing this on because a forceful rising China is a strategic problem for the United States. Whether or not you think the United States should be involved militarily or diplomatically or trade-wise with any of these countries, whether you're an isolationist, anti-war activist, or what have you, you should not want China to be the one exerting its bigness, its largesse in the region, and creating its own hegemonic power structure there. You should want the United States and democracy in general, to be against these kind of things, to set up trade relations, military training exercises, or okay, I'll give you the military exercises just because I know a lot of people are like anti-war for the sake of anti-war. But all these other things the United States did, the TTP, TTP. Fuck, man, my brain is all over the place today. 1 second, I'll look it up. TTP. Deal. Yeah, the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Sorry, geez, I had to look that up again. Whether you're against that because it gives corporations too much power or whatever, you should want these trade deals to exist that create the environment for American and democratic interest to win out against Chinese autocratic interest. And so that's what we've done over the last about 10-15 years or so. So yeah, that's what we have here. But I want to know what you think. Go ahead and hit me up on Twitter at Crowdsourced Paul. Let me know what you're thinking about this, because we do have to continue on. So continuing on, we have some developments about the US elections with primary results that have come in over the last 2 weeks. And with that, we are seeing that the House Freedom Caucus is on the outs. Kind of, sort of. Let's talk about it. So the House worked far into the night Tuesday, which caused many Republican members to miss out on 8 different party fundraisers and lose out on hundreds of thousands of dollars in campaign cash. Yes, the Democrats hold the majority in the House, but Tuesday's night's delay had nothing to do with Democrats. The fault lies completely with the House Freedom Caucus. CNN reported that members of the caucus are on the outs with both Republicans and Democrats for what some Republicans are calling childish antics. Led by Representative Scott Perry of Pennsylvania and Chip Roy of Texas, the caucus members have forced dozens of roll call votes on even non-controversial bills. They say they are protesting about process concerns, arguing lawmakers should have more time to read legislation before it comes to the floor. This is likely not the reason. It's a good reason to use as cover, but no. Now, they are also reluctant to hand easy wins over to Democrats who have struggled to pass their agenda. That is more than likely the reason. At least one GOP lawmaker had privately called on the GOP steering committee, which doles out committee assignments, to take this episode into consideration when determining which seats Republicans get next year. Quote, demanding roll call votes on every bill comes at a cost, said Representative Don Bacon, a Nebraskan Republican who represents a district won by President Joe Biden. Some of these vote series go on for hours, and members lose meetings with constituents as an example. Even some members of the House Freedom Caucus are irritated with the strategy, saying they're worried it dilutes the overall influence of the caucus. Quote, we're screwing all of us, said one member of the conservative group. And this is important, right? There are ways for the House to slow down procedural order in order to delay or eventually nix bills, and one of them is to call for a roll call vote. And what a roll call vote basically means is that each individual member of the House has to vote yay or nay, rather than being voted by affirmation, which is the just for all those that say aye, for all those opposed, nay, the ayes have it, yada, yada, yada. Now, those affirmation votes are typically done simply for procedural reasons. The House has to have the vote, something like that. But the conferences, the Republican Democrat conferences, the House Majority Leader and the other party leaders know how their members are voting, right? And so they're able to do that, and they record the vote. Every vote is recorded, and they know it's like 200 and whatever to whatever, right? So vote passes, it fails. With a roll call vote, you have to call each individual member to vote, and they have to go up, push the button, put a letter in the box, whatever. I don't know the exact the exact way that's done right now. It used to be a letter in a box, and I'm pretty sure they just push a button and they record their vote. And that's when you hear so and so from New York, aye, and they record the vote and the little tally goes up. And it takes a long ass time to vote because there's 435 members. And so it takes like 40 seconds or so per member. Let's do the math really quick on that. Let's do the math. So we'll say it takes about 75% of a minute. So that's 0.75. So that takes 45 seconds per member. There's 435 members. So that's 19,557 seconds divided by 60. Did I do that right? Hold on. I'm not sure if I did that right. So we have 45 seconds. Let's go ahead and divide that by 60 because that gives us the number of minutes. All right. And then we have 435 members. So times 435, that's 326 minutes, y'all. That is 5 hours and roughly 5.5 hours. We'll just say roughly 5.5 hours to vote on a single bill. No wonder the Republican caucus is having a shit fit over this. You're taking an uncontroversial bill, a bill that you know is going to pass because it's going to be like, let's say it's going to be like 390 votes, right? Something ridiculous. Majority of Republicans support it, majority of Democrats support it. It's passing, right? And you're going to make them actually call out the votes. It's not like the votes don't get recorded with other methods. Right? They get recorded regardless. It's just it takes so much time to do it. It's fucking ridiculous. Let's be real. Okay? Like I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. Like some things should just happen quicker. I understand that there's rules and procedures and processes that have to be followed due to house rules and tradition and everything else like that. But I mean, it should just be a simple push of a button somewhere, and you're like, "Oh, did I vote incorrectly? Do you confirm that you vote yes on this bill?" Yes. You just push it twice, just like any kind of computer system you use. Are you sure you agree to the terms and condition? Yes. Like, that's what should happen, and it should be very quick, right? But it's not, because of the rules written and the inability to fix those rules for whatever reason. I mean, again, this is one way that politicians can use to slow down the passage of bills, to take up time, to make their problems with a bill noticeable. So that's maybe the primary reason why it doesn't go away. But yeah, that's what we're seeing here. Like, seriously. So yeah, that's what we got. But we have to continue on now. And now we are going to talk about the mass shootings that we've experienced over the last several weeks. So, out of respect for the victims, we're going to have a moment of silence before we talk about this. Please join me in that moment of silence. All right. Thank you for joining me in that moment of silence. I greatly appreciate it. So we're going to talk about it. Okay. And you know what this is about, so I don't even have to say a trigger warning. If you need to get out of this, get out of it now, because we're about to get into some serious shit, especially with some of the things that people have lied about with the most recent one. Okay. All right, let's get into it. Another mass shooting happened this week, this time in Texas. Gun violence, gun control, the Second Amendment. Quote, "The only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun." That's the refrain that pretty much sums up the talking points of most of the right in the United States. And, of course, the evergreen thoughts and prayers. There's always a lot of thoughts and prayers for the people left behind after the mass shootings that have become so regular in this country that they barely make a blip on our radar anymore. The left bemoans every shooting and every death. Democratic lawmakers don't get money from gun lobbies, so they're quick with the accusations against their colleagues after every shooting. Lots of words, but no meaningful action. This week, an 18-year-old, whose name we will not be reporting on the Roundup, and nobody else should either, just like we stopped reporting the names of suspected serial killers, entered an elementary school classroom in Uvalde, Texas. Before he was shot and killed by Border Patrol agents, yes, Border Patrol, ICE, he murdered 19 fourth graders and 2 teachers. What he did... Oh, I'm sorry. The shooter had no criminal record and no history of mental illness. What he did have was weapons. He had 2 AR-style rifles that he bought at a local federal firearms license on May 17th and May 20th. According to the Texas Department of Public Safety, he also purchased 375 rounds of ammunition on May 18th. In Texas, an individual between the ages of 18 and 21 can buy a long gun or rifle, such as an AR-15. Carrying a gun in Texas required a permit until September of 2021, when a state law freed Texans from the permit requirement, known as constitutional carry. Texas Governor Greg Abbott signed a bill last summer, championed by gun rights advocates, that allowed for permitless carry. The law was criticized at the time by Democrats, with Representative Veronica Escobar of El Paso predicting at the time that it would cause more violence and loss. Abbott said on Wednesday, after Uvalde shooting, that, quote, "The ability of an 18-year-old to buy a long gun has been in place in the state for more than 60 years. Say that again. The ability to buy a long gun in the state of Texas has existed for more than 60 years. Of course, it's saying that it's not the law's fault, right? It doesn't have anything to do with the laws of guns in this country. But Abbott pushed aside any calls to strengthen gun laws, saying, quote, "We as a government need to find a way to target that mental health challenge and do something about it." Shortly after the news of the shooting began circulating, Senator Ted Cruz released a statement that said in part, "Heidi and I are uplifting our prayers to the entire Uvalde community during this devastating time, and we mourn the lives that were taken by this act of evil." It is an act of evil, but something has to be done about it. Now, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton said, quote, "We can't stop bad people from doing bad things. We can potentially arm and prepare and train teachers and other administrators to respond quickly." That, in my opinion, Ken Paxton's opinion, is the best answer. Because of course it is. Because again, only a good guy with a gun can stop a bad guy with a gun. We saw how well that worked out. Now, Democratic Representative Ruben Gallego of Arizona attacked Cruz on Twitter. Quote, "Fuck you, Ted Cruz. You care about a fetus, but you will let our children get slaughtered." Gallego posted on Twitter, "Just get your ass to Cancun. You're useless." Just to be clear, fuck you, Ted Cruz, you fucking baby killer, Guerrero said in a second post. Candidate for governor's seat, Beto O'Rourke, crashed a press conference that features Texas Republicans approaching the stage and accusing Abbott and others of doing nothing to prevent this kind of violence. And they haven't. He was shouted down fairly quickly and escorted out by law enforcement within minutes. We can go ahead and watch that after this. O'Rourke said gun violence prevention could be accomplished. Quote, "If we had a governor who cared more about the people of Texas than he does his own political career or his fealty to the NRA." O'Rourke continued, "And if you need any proof of that, check the schedule for the NRA's convention this Friday right here in the state of Texas. 5 of the worst mass shootings in U.S. history in this state on his watch. What does he do about it? He goes to the NRA convention to brag about how easy he made it to purchase guns in this state, to carry them publicly without a background check whatsoever. Words, not action." The Second Amendment contains one word that seems to fall on deaf ears for the people who have championed unfettered access to guns. That word is regulated. The lack of federal regulations means that people can buy guns legally in a state with few regulations and carry them across state borders into a state with more regulations. This is seen often in New York and Chicago. The lack of federal red flag laws and the lack of federal background checks, the utter lack of federal regulations that would curtail immediate access to firearms. Every time there's a mass shooting, there's lots of accusations and recriminations, but nothing changes. The stories hit the airwaves, the anger rises with the rhetoric, and then the stories fade away, out of memory. What can we do? The National Rifle Association has their 2022 national conference this week in Texas. Former President Trump will be there to speak. So will Abbott and Cruz and many Republican lawmakers. Houston's mayor said the conference has been on the books for 2 years and it's a contractual obligation. The conference will proceed as the NRA doesn't back down. There will no doubt be protests outside the venue. In fact, Bette Midler is encouraging her followers to come armed to an organization to protest the conference on May 26th. And it in a big thing of irony here. The NRA doesn't allow guns in this conference. Even if former President Trump was not speaking at the conference, guns would not be allowed by the group that pushes for guns to be allowed everywhere else. Why? Because they know it's a fucking security risk. The actress made remarks while responding to a tweet suggesting, quote, people should show up and protest at this conference. Miller's tweeted Wednesday at the George R. Brown Convention Center in Houston, Texas this weekend, come armed. Even without Ms. Medler's encouragement, Texas gun laws practically guarantee there will be as many firearms as among the protesters. You know where they won't be any firearms? Inside the venue. Because President Trump is going to be there. Secret Service, fine, understandable. But the NRA has always, or maybe not always, but for a long time, prevented guns from being at its conference. Which is why the only time you see a gun, when a speaker is speaking and holding it up for the cameras. So what can be done about this? I don't know. I honestly don't know what can be done. I know some things that can work on this issue that have long-standing majority of support among the American people. Universal background checks. That means if you buy it from your fucking brother, you get a background check. Why? People can't be trusted. Simple as that. People can say, well, we have background checks, and if you sell your gun to a person that's not allowed to have them, then you're breaking the law. No, that's not how it works. The way it works, legally speaking, is all you have to do is say, well, Judge, I didn't know this person wasn't allowed to have a gun. I did my due diligence. I checked their ID. They were saying who they say they were. I have no obligation to run a background check on this person. So I used my best judgment and sold him the weapon. If that weapon is then used in the commission of crime, no one is held at fault. No one else but the killer is held at fault. Despite the fact that due diligence was not actually practiced. We have laws that prevent certain individuals from obtaining firearms and weapons for a reason. Even Republicans know that mentally ill people, people that are troubled, people that beat their wives and girlfriends and that were former criminals shouldn't be allowed to have a gun. But by God, if you try to make me wait 2 days to have a weapon when I'm a law-abiding citizen, then fuck you, buddy. You're preventing me from carrying out my constitutional right. That is the narrative that they have. That is what they always say. Every single time. Make no mistake about it. Republican lawmakers, some Democrat lawmakers are beholden to their constituents. And their constituents, the loudest ones that are pro-gun, it's not necessarily the NRA. It's gun owners of America. If you haven't heard about that until this program right now, I suggest you look it up. 30,000 member organization, the most vocal and rabid pro-Second Amendment group in the United States. They're the ones that pushed for these conferences to continue back in the 90s after Columbine. That's how long this has been going on. There hasn't, majority of my life, we've been dealing with school shootings because we do not want to do anything in this country. Because that's what it boils down to. Politically, we don't have the fucking will to do anything. Hamstrung by politicians and lobby groups from doing even the most basic of things, like universal background checks, to stop the proliferation of guns to people that shouldn't have them, to people that the vast majority of the United States agrees should not be carrying a weapon. We can't even get red flag laws in the United States because that's a violation of due process. No, it's not. It is not a violation of due process. You just don't like it. The way a red flag works is that a person goes to a judge and be like, Your Honor, I have reason to believe that so-and-so is going to hurt themselves or somebody else. Whatever the case may be. Here's the evidence I have. Can we temporarily take their weapon away from them? Basically a grand jury. You can say that the process doesn't have enough due process. I'm okay with that. I understand that argument. But to be against it in its entirety, to be against the idea itself, just means you put up your ability to have a gun and you put up your fear of having your gun taken away from you above the protection and life of other people. Because you're paranoid that the government, big bad government, big brother, is going to come and confiscate your fucking gun. Despite all the evidence to the contrary. You are conspiratorial minded and paranoid, and you need to be called out about it. If you are one of those people watching this program, feel free to contact me later. We can have a debate about it. But that is my thoughts and opinions on this as of right now. This anger that you're hearing in my voice is genuine. I can't stomach this shit. I am trying to keep as calm as I can, but 14 people to this past week died again. And the most people can say that we're going to do about it is make kids live in fear again. Get them security. The likely reason why the ICE or Border Patrol agents that ended up being the SWAT team that eventually took down the gunman could not get into that room is because of the it's likely, don't have 100% proof of this, okay? It's the only thing that makes sense to me. Is likely because they already had reinforced doors. SWAT teams are trained to breach doorways. And if their miniature batter ram could not break that door down, then that is more than likely a reinforced door to prevent slaughter from happening. They had to be let in by a staff member. How crazy is that? We have kids going to school with bulletproof backpacks. Bulletproof backpacks to try and use them as shields against guns that shouldn't ever be in the vicinity of a fucking school. And we can't get background checks on everybody. We can't require training. We can't require people to take insurance to at least in the instance of a national tragedy. Should it happen, the families wouldn't have to cover their own medical and funeral expenses. This should not be acceptable to anybody. But it is. And that is infuriating. I don't know what else there is to say about this. There are certain things that we could do as a country that would help the situation at least a little bit. One of those things, maybe raising the age to buy a fucking gun. Can we entertain that? Or should shall not be infringed stop us from doing that? Oh shit. Yeah, that was Final Fantasy that just fell. I can't, man. I can't with this. It's so... Nothing. The likelihood of anything being done is very small. Another school shooting and nothing can happen. We got results in Parkland, a Republican state, because kids, children, people that weren't even old enough to vote were able to make change happen. And even that change, as good of a victory as it was, is trying to be chipped away at as we speak. And there was another school shooting. And Republicans across the country have made it easier to have a gun because they are afraid of this happening without realizing that part of this happening is because of the laws that they passed. We can't even have a waiting period of 2 days of buying a gun. We have national background checks that in some states overrule the federal government and say that you have to sell that gun if they can't return a background check within 3 days. It's called a default sale. How messed up is that? You can't tell me that's an infringement on a right. And if you tell me it's an infringement on a right, you can't tell me it's an overly burdensome one at that. And be taken seriously. I'm not going to stand for it. And there's more fuckery afoot with this. And part of that fuckery, because it can't be the gun that does this. No, guns don't kill people. People kill people. True. Guns make it easier to kill people. The proliferation of guns increases the likelihood of people dying. These are facts. Facts don't care about your feelings. They don't care about your ideology. They exist without your acknowledgement of them or not. And they want to scapegoat people with mental health issues. And they not only want to scapegoat people with mental health issues, right-wing extremist, evil pieces of shit. Yes, what I am talking about, the people that I'm talking about right now, that I'm about to talk about right now, are fucking evil. I know in this program that we say we do not want to increase the vitriol that happens in the country, but you have to call this out when it is what it is. And this is objectively evil. They are trying to blame this on a trans person. Why? Because, quote unquote, it's good optics to them. If you spent any time whatsoever on Twitter in right-wing spaces, you 100% have seen this story. This should not be anything new to you. But not everybody is able to go through the muck and deal with this shit as much as we are. And they don't know about this. Or if they do, they're just finding out about it either on this program or prior to me talking about this. And it has to be said because this is objectively evil. It is abhorrent. The far right is falsely blaming a trans woman for the Texas school shooting. This report came out of Vice News, but we saw it on this program. We saw it on right-wing blogs, things that they come out of the 90s with a ton of ads, a ton of scams on them that people go to get their news from, get their lies from, to get their confirmation bias from. Posted all across Twitter. Images stolen from another trans woman's Twitter or Facebook and posted as if this is the person that did the killing. Why? Why was it done? Because it helps their narrative. Propaganda abounds, and we are starting to live in fucking hell world. I am not a doomer. This is infuriating, and it makes me question my faith in humanity. So we're going to pull it up on the screen really quick for some of this stuff. Okay. So this is the article from Vice News. Vice News does some decent investigative journalism still. We're going to use them as an example here. Okay. So what we have here, Paul Gosar. If there's something evil being said, something abhorrent, something racist, something sexist, something transphobic, you bet your ass fucking Paul Gosar is going to talk about it. A transsexual leftist illegal alien made Salvato Romos. It's apparently your kind of trash. Fuck you, you evil piece of shit. I hope you hear me call you evil piece of shit. Because that is objectively evil. Stand back and stand by. Of course. Racist fucking statement. A Proud Boy fuckwit. Found a picture on Reddit that does not have anything to do with this person whatsoever. Let's go over to the tweets. So, I'm just going to read these out. Right-wingers, including Dr. Paul Gosar, he should lose his fucking doctorate, have been spreading misinformation that the shooter in Texas was a trans woman, using random photos they pulled from Reddit. The person in the photos is currently posting on Reddit in apparent horror that her photos are being used this way. Don't want to spread her image even further in connection with this bullshit. But if you see a photo of a person in red long sleeve Coca-Cola shirt and black miniskirt, that is falsely identified Reddit poster in the screenshots that they're talking about. How can anybody, I don't care if you're left wing or right wing, be supportive of this bullshit? You're putting an innocent person's life at danger. For what? To say that trans people are mentally ill? Are you fucking kidding me? You're mentally ill. No. That is, they're not mentally ill. They know exactly what they're doing. They're not driven by delusions that they can't help. They are 100% in control of their own mind right now. And to say that this is mental illness, what I just did was wrong, and I apologize for that. So we got a question from the chat. Hold on, sorry, I'm having mess ups on my multi-screen here. From Bisky. So, oh, did it not add? Where's the oh, I don't have the highlights on. There we go. So Bisky __. Is that 3? Yeah, 2 underscores. I have no idea who Paul Gosar is. Paul Gosar is a Republican congressman. Don't recall what state he's from, but made a Mimi Attack on Titan thing where he was where he was one of the characters of Attack on Titan killing Titans, and AOC was a Titan. That's the kind of person he is. Racist. Speaks at American First conferences with his buddy Nick Fuentes. Continuing on with these tweets, there's also a photo going around of a person with bangs drinking out of a green glass bottle. The person in the photo has since tweeted that the photo is of them and not of the shooter, who was killed. People, reportedly 4chaners, have apparently just been grabbing random photos of trans women they think look remotely like the photo of the shooter they've apparently been able to find, or think they found, who knows, and using them to claim the shooter was trans. And I saw this in my Facebook group circles. Because yes, I'm old. I still use Facebook. Shoot me. It's how I keep up with the news. It's how I am able to track down right-wing narratives without having to go to 4chan to see how it's entered the ether. Entered the ether that is the basic Republican zeitgeist. Basic conservative zeitgeist. Without having to delve deep into the muck for my own sanity. Now, Paul Gosar has since deleted his tweet, right? But is he making an apology? No, because it fucking helps his narrative. That's what we're seeing here. I don't know why anybody wants to give these people the benefit of the doubt. No idea. It is infuriating. It is evil. And people that want to give everybody, let me make sure I say this correctly. There are some arguments that should not be entertained. People that are outright lying and acting in bad faith are not actors that you should deal with kid gloves. They should not be able to air their grievances without pushback at the very least. And if they continue to go on, they should be rightly ridiculed and making an example of. Feel free to debate some of these people, but don't let their misinformation, their propaganda, their evil acts go unchallenged. Don't let them fester. Don't let them propagate. The best way to tackle these things is to, if you see it, to call it out. And if they continue to be a propagandist fuckwit, ban them from your community. Because they're not there to be a good faith actor. They're not there to have their mind changed or to learn information. They're there as a political actor with an agenda. And that agenda is abhorrent. It is evil. It is going to lead to bad outcomes. And they must be stopped. This is partly why I am no longer a free speech absolutist. I don't think the government should be the one that comes in and tells us what we can and can't say. Private company? Sure. Society in general? Absolutely. Shaming can work. But being blasted for being wrong, abhorrent, evil, those things have better effect. And if you don't speak up, I'm not going to say that you're complicit. I don't believe in that. I don't believe that a person who doesn't speak up is complicit. I believe that they're cowardly. Don't be a coward. Call them out. Give them enough rope, so to speak. Because this is on Twitch, I'm not going to say it. You know the idiom. And let them finish the job. And then pounce like a tiger and rip them to shreds. And if you can't do that, call someone else that can. Because by not pushing back on it, you help normalize it. Which is why we're covering this on this program, on the news roundup this week. And that is what I have to say about the latest shooting. All right, I'm going to go off camera for a couple of seconds to regain my composure. I'll be right back. Just going to drink some water while I decompress. A couple of seconds tops. Or 10 seconds tops. I'll be right back. All right, and we're back. All right, so let us continue on with the news roundup. And we're going to start talking about some SCOTUS updates. SCOTUS being the Supreme Court of the United States. Now, on Monday, the Supreme Court of the United States gutted constitutional protection that historically provided a federal lifeline to innocent prisoners facing lifelong incarceration or even execution. The case concerned wrongful convictions stemming from poor legal counsel given to them by the state. In a direct blow to prisoners who are hoping to get federal courts to hear their claims of innocence, and in another attack on stare decisis, the court decided that the federal judges can't determine guilt of people for state crimes, even if there is proof of innocence. And it's stuff like that that makes me say that we're living in fucking hell world right now. Honestly, if you were a Bernie bro and you didn't vote for Hillary Clinton, shame on you. I hate to say that, but this was anybody that was politically engaged at all saw this coming due to the ages of the Supreme Court justices that would sat on the bench and their liberal bent. This is taking away the rights of innocent people from redress and saying the state made its case, we can't do anything about it. Bullshit. Where's the mercy? Where's the facts? Federalism doesn't mean you throw out facts, mercy, common sense just because, well, the federal courts aren't supposed to be involved. No, fuck that. The federal courts exist as a check on state power. That's one of the reasons they exist. Going back to the Articles of Confederation, which is what a lot of these people want to do, is unsustainable. It looks like I'm making this into a clip too. In its 6-3 supermajority ruling with Clarence Thomas, because of course it was Clarence Thomas, Scalia died and now he's just like, well, I gotta write all the fucked up shit that I've been waiting on. Who wrote the majority opinion, described that federal courts should only act as a review of state procedures and whether or not they acted correctly when finding someone guilty. If this doesn't motivate you to vote, I don't know what will. Between this and the school shooting, and the lack of anything getting done due to the procedures that are hampering and breaking down our democracy, breaking down our civil society. Because make no mistake, part of this is procedural. Part of these are norms that have been thrown out in order for pure partisan gain, especially around the Supreme Court, are part of the reason why we are seeing as much partisanship as we are seeing right now. One of the reasons. It's one of the reasons why the left and the right are getting more extreme by the day. Because things aren't being done to help regular people. The inability for Congress to do anything without 60 senators being approving of it is hampering our ability to fix broken systems. And the Supreme Court is in the way of that as well, especially with rulings like this. All because, as Clarence Thomas said, the court's lower rulings violated state sovereignty. I'm sorry, but federalism does not preclude common sense. It does not preclude the federal government from being a check on state power. That's the whole point of federalism. Federalism is for the states and the federal government to check each other's power in an effort to stop fucked up shit from happening. It's why the Constitution supersedes states' constitutions. It's why the 14th and 13th Amendment were passed. It's why the United States has gone from a state-centric system to a shared powers system. Because we learned lessons from the past. And we're right now quickly forgetting them, all because of partisan bullshit. Quoting past decisions, Thomas wrote that ultimately, quote, it would be unseemly in our dual system of government for a federal district court to upset a state court conviction without giving an opportunity to the state courts to correct a constitutional violation. No. The state already failed to correct its constitutional violation. That's why the federal courts are stepping in. This, of course, is probably one of those situations where there's some business in the background saying, let's get that bread, fam. I shouldn't have used that. That was in poor taste. Excellent. There, that's a little bit better. I'm sure. Because, as you all know, Clarence Thomas gets a lot of lobby money from his wife. That's not a conflict of interest at all. Again, another norm being jettisoned for partisan gain. Now, the decision is a win for strict constitutionalists who argue that the federal courts have broadened their powers too much and stripped away its states' abilities to make meaningful decisions on crime. No, it is I'm just going to keep saying it. The federal courts and the federal government exist to be a check on state bullshittery, on state power. And the states exist to be a check on federal power. They don't exist to ignore facts, logic, reason, common sense like this decision does. This decision is just, it's abhorrent. Now, the case before the justices arose after state officials in Arizona petitioned the Supreme Court to prevent 2 of the state's death row inmates. Death penalty shouldn't exist. Just gonna make that clear right now. I'm 100% against the death penalty. Too many innocent people are murdered by the state every year. It seems like every day we find out another person on death row is innocent, given the facts of the case, especially if those convictions were between the 1960s and the 1990s. Because racism is evergreen in America. Petitioned the Supreme Court to prevent 2 of its state's death row inmates, one with a strong case of proclaimed innocence, the other with a low IQ and a history of family abuse, from seeking relief in federal court from capital punishment. The state argued that the condemned men should not be allowed to present new evidence to a federal judge when they have failed to do so previously in state court. Lawyers from the condemned men pointed out that they had only failed to present the evidence in state court because the legal counsel that they had been assigned by the state was woefully inadequate. This is a common thing. States do not want to pay for private attorneys. They don't want to pay good money for state public defenders. If many states had their way, we would not have public defenders at all. Because what is in the state's interest? State's interest is to get a conviction to make the state look better. That's just logic. And the federal court system created, not out of whole cloth, but out of reason, logic, common sense, the facts don't care about your feelings crowd, that the modern court system, that courts require people that are having their rights potentially being taken away from them, their life potentially being taken away from them, need proper legal defense. So what's next? The court's going to overturn that too? Is the right wing, given the things that I've experienced online over the last 4 weeks, ready just to go Judge Dredd, Punisher on people? I don't know. It looks like some of them are. And this is another way to do that. Now, lawyers for the state of Arizona argued that the court should allow the execution of the man who had a strong case for actual innocence, using the rationale that the lower court's ruling violated a decades-old anti-terrorism law made by Congress. Wow. I can't even respond to that. The law prohibits state defendants from introducing new evidence during a federal trial, even if the evidence exonerates the accused. Of course, the war on terrorism shows its face again, and it's another thing that takes away your rights as a U.S. citizen. Pretty sure Osama bin Laden's happy about that. He said that the federal governments should not be allowed to override the state's core power to enforce criminal law. That continues to be the case, the majority ruled. even where defendants are given bad legal advice by attorneys provided for them by the same state that are condemning them to long prison sentences and or execution. The decision eviscerated the Supreme Court's own precedent because, again, stare decisis is a norm. It is not codified in any law that once a court rules, can't overrule it. That's a good thing. Okay? Courts fuck up. They should be allowed to correct mistakes. I'm not saying that we should get rid of that, but that's why this is happening. Because the Court of the United States, the Supreme Court of the United States, is not a august body of high-minded individuals with no biases. They are at the whims of their own ideology and biases and political influence as everybody else. And they are a political institution. And that has been the case since its founding. Has been the case since Marbury versus Madison, which is a decision I agree with, by the way. Because a Supreme Court that can't overturn laws that are unconstitutional is a court that does not need to exist at all. But it's things like this that make me question the logic and the sound reasoning of those decisions and makes me makes me want to see core constitutional changes to the court that puts rails on things like this, that spells it out, that takes these norms that only exist on paper and by tradition that doesn't seem that anybody gives a shit about, and solidifies them into law, as well as provide other guardrails against fuckery such as this. Because with this ruling, the federal government could pass a law and it wouldn't matter. Now, in her dissenting opinion, Justice Sotomayor decried the ruling, quoting, "This decision is perverse, it is illogical." Sotomayor argued that under the court's own precedent, prisoners cannot be held accountable and effectively punished for, quote, their attorney's failures to present claims in state court. She concluded that as a result of the majority's decision, the Sixth Amendment guarantee that criminal defendants have the right to effective legal counsel at trial is now an empty one. And that is 100% true. Because they don't care about that. They believe that the court's ruling for Miranda rights and for providing effective counsel that relied on an interpretation of the Sixth Amendment and the Fifth Amendment and the Fourth Amendment were wrong rulings because of their political ideology. It's a little bit authoritarian, if you ask me, the way they're ruling. It's essentially saying a state government can do no wrong, and the federal government should be toothless, feckless, powerless. Now, in the future, she said, prisoners who have had poor legal assistance would have no relief, which is true based on this decision. Quote, the responsibility for this devastating outcome lies not with Congress, but the court. And she is 100% correct. And this, make no mistake, a lot of the decisions that are coming out of the Supreme Court now are making liberals and leftists distrust the court, similar to how conservatives distrusted the court due to its decisions surrounding civil rights. And it's going to increase partisanship. That's why we need amendments. We need new laws. We need to codify some of these norms into law. We're going to suffer the consequences. I told you all, this one's going to be a fiery one. There's a lot of messed up stuff happening right now. A ton of messed up things. But that concludes our comments about the Supreme Court. So, if you have news you want to see us cover, or videos you want to see commentary on, there are a number of ways you can contact us. Now, if you want to also join our groups or join us on the newscast, because these are open caller shows, you can jump in and participate. If you have a question you want answered and you want to ask me directly and have a little bit of back and forth, willing to do that. So here's how you can contact us. First, you can join our Discord. Discord links are above and below, and you can find those links there. Our Discord community is what we're trying to build up to have contests and things like that. We like to be able to have a community of not necessarily like-minded people, but people that like to engage in public discourse with a little bit less vitriol and a little more high-mindedness. That's something that you're interested in, you can join our Discord. You can also join us on Facebook. As I said previously in the program, I still use Facebook. And the way I use Facebook is that I participate in the numerous different political debate communities. And we run our own political debate community called Tribune Commons. So if that's something that you want to engage in, you can join us on Facebook. And you can also follow me on Twitter, where I like to post memes, whatever else I feel like. And you can contact me there at your leisure. So let us continue on with the newscast. All right. So coming up with some state primary election results. Trump took lumps in the Georgia primaries this week, though Marjorie Taylor Greene and Herschel Walker both pulled out wins. Governor Brian Kemp handily put down Trump-backed David Perdue, making the third primary a Trump-backed candidate for governor has lost this year. Jay Williams, a Republican strategist in Georgia, said Perdue failed to provide voters with a rationale why they should unseat Kemp, a staunch conservative who worked with the legislature to pass a wide ranging of measures that curb voting access, among other things. Perdue's main argument that the 2020 election was stolen from Trump wasn't enough to convince most voters to make a switch, Williams said. Better to stick with the devil you know than the one you don't, kind of situation. Now Kemp will face Democrat Stacey Abrams on November 8th, who he barely edged out in the last election for governor, where Stacey Abrams made some honestly pretty stark claims that there was vote fuckery afoot. Some of that seemed to be true, and so we have that. Now, Brad Raffensperger ultimately pulled out a win over Heiss for Secretary of State, meaning that both Trump-backed candidates who parroted this election fraud claims went down in defeat. Congresswoman Lacey Macbeth, Congresswoman Lucy McBath defeated fellow House Democrat Caroline Bourdeaux in a win to the nomination in Georgia's 7th Congressional District. McBath currently represents the 6th Congressional District, but she chose to run in the neighboring 7th District after Republican redistricting altered the state's congressional maps. Raffensperger's office said a number of voters, more than 850,000, cast ballots in the 3 weeks leading up to Election Day, a 168% increase over the last midterm election in 2018. Ultimately, the turnout topped 1.2 million voters, nearly doubling 2018's 607 total. This is huge. This means that a lot of people are still politically engaged. Now in Arkansas, Trump's former press secretary, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, sailed to a primary win for governor with 83% of the vote. She is the first woman GOP candidate for governor in the state. Perhaps the biggest surprise in Alabama's Republican primary election for U.S. Senate was first-time candidate Katie Britt's strong performance in a crowded field. Britt, who came away with nearly 45% of the vote despite only polling in the mid-30s in the lead up to the primary, will become the first woman elected to the U.S. Senate from Alabama if she wins in November. She now faces conservative U.S. Congressman Mo Brooks in a runoff election that takes place less than a month from now on June 21st. Now, in the race for Texas Attorney General, wait a second, hold on. Congressman Mo Brooks for runoff election. Okay, so runoff election for the primary. Got it. So this isn't a shoe-in. There's going to be a runoff because neither candidate got 50%. Now continuing on, in the race for Texas Attorney General, incumbent Ken Paxton defeated his GOP rival George P. Bush by convincing 68% to 32%. The third face-off between Representative Henny Collier and Jessica Serranos remains undecided. The veteran Texas Democrat incumbent declared victory over his progressive challenger, but his lead is less than 200 votes, and there are still outstanding votes to be counted. That is of the last update that we had read. So people might be asking, especially our more progressive viewers might be asking, why are Democrats backing Henry Collier in the race against Jessica Serranos? And a lot of people are like, well, a lot of them are going to say the Democrats never back a progressive. Democrats don't do that. Progressives are anti-Democrat or anti-Democrat establishment. So of course they're not backing her. I don't think that that's necessarily true. There's probably some truth to that. Don't get me wrong. The Democratic establishment are not necessarily friends to progressives, but they're not going to stop a progressive from winning a general election, which is what some of this rhetoric leads a lot of people to believe. The reason that they're backing him is because he is an incumbent. And when Blue PAC and a lot of other PACs, the Congressional Democratic Caucus and the like, back incumbents because incumbents have a much easier time winning than people that aren't. So from a strategic standpoint, even if that person does not fully align with your values, it makes sense to back the incumbent. Personally, I support Jessica Serranos, but I do not vote in her district, so my say does not matter. I voted for George Kazar. I'm sorry, I'm terrible with names today, everybody. I'm so sorry about this. And he's very much a progressive from Texas District 32. I don't remember exactly what my district is, honestly. They redrew the maps. It changed on me, okay? Shoot me, okay? But he's very much a progressive, and he won handedly in the primary. So we'll at least have one additional progressive, more than likely, because this seat is staunchly blue, going to Congress from Texas. So there's that. And the Democrats are poised to support him fully against his Republican challenger. So be on the lookout for that. But that concludes our talk about the primary elections. Now we have some updates for you about the baby formula shortage and what President Biden and members of Congress are attempting to do about it. So a military plane carrying enough specialty infant formula for more than 500,000 baby bottles arrived Sunday in Indianapolis. It was the first of several flights expected from Europe aimed at relieving a shortage that has sent parents scrambling to find enough food for their children. President Biden authorized the use of the Air Force planes for the effort, dubbed Operation Fly Formula, because no commercial flights were available. The formula weighed 78,000 pounds, or 35,308 kilograms. White House Press Secretary Jean-Pierre told... Not Carrie. Karine Jean-Pierre. Karine, yeah. Reporters aboard Air Force One as Biden flew from South Korea to Japan. Agricultural Secretary Tom Vilsack was in Indianapolis to greet the arrival of the first shipment. The flights are intended to provide some incremental relief in the coming days as the government works on a more lasting response to the shortage. Sunday's flight brought 15% of the specialty formula needed to the U.S., and because of various actions by the government, people should see more formula in stores starting as early as this week. Now, later on Sunday, the White House announced the first 2 Defense Production Act authorizations for infant formula, both coming from the Department of Health and Human Services. The manufacturer, Abbott Nutrition, can now receive priority orders of raw materials like sugar, corn, and corn syrup for infant formula, which the White House said will allow the manufacturer to increase production quickly by more than a third. Rickett, owner of Mead Johnson, can now receive priority orders of consumables like filters and other single-use products necessary to generate certain oils needed to produce infant formula, the White House said, which will allow Ricketts facilities to operate at maximum capacity. This should be a lot of good effort, maybe a bit longer than some people like. I don't necessarily know if the government could have acted faster. Certainly could have done maybe some things slightly sooner, such as the Defense Production Act, especially since we were already in a shortage when Abbott was shut down. But this should actually offer a lot of relief to families in the next few months. So that is a good thing. So yeah, that's good. Let's see. Do we want to cover that story? Do we want to cover that story? I don't know. We got about 10 minutes left on the newscast, and I haven't gotten to the economy yet. All right, we'll come back to a story that we wanted to cover, assuming we have enough time before we have to wrap it up. So we're going to continue on now to the U.S. economy, starting with the stock market. So U.S. stocks edged higher on Thursday, extending gains from Wednesday's session as investors seek to end a 7-week long streak in the S&P 500, a 7-week long streak in decline in the S&P 500. The move higher on Thursday came as investors continue to weigh the possibilities of economic recession against strong earnings results from retail companies. Now, the state of the U.S. economy also is in question, though. We're really talking about this without doomerism, but it is important and it can help save people some headache. So the U.S. economy actually shrank in the first 3 months of the year, even though consumers and businesses kept spending at a solid pace, the government reported today. This is a slight downgrade of its previous estimates for the January to March quarter, the first quarter of the year. Last quarter's drop in U.S. gross domestic product, the broadest gauge of economic output, does not likely signal the start of a recession. The contraction was caused in part by a wider trade gap. The nation spent more on imports than other countries did on U.S. exports. The trade gap slashed first quarter GDP by 3.2 percentage points. And a slower restocking of goods in stores and warehouses, which had built up their inventories in the previous quarter for the 2021 holiday shopping season, knocked nearly 1.1 percentage points off the January to March GDP. It was the first drop in GDP since the second quarter of 2020, in the depths of the COVID-19 recession, and followed by a robust 6.9% expansion in the final 3 months of 2021. The nation remains stuck in a painful grip of high inflation, which has caused particularly severe hardships for low-income households, many of them people of color. Though U.S. workers had been receiving sizable pay increases, their wages in most cases haven't kept pace with inflation. In April, the consumer price index jumped to 8.3% from a year earlier, with the month-over-month rate seeing a sharp decline from March, though. This is just below the fastest such rise in 4 decades, set 1 month earlier. Still, by most measures, the economy as a whole remains healthy, though likely is weakening, which makes sense. You can only run an economy hot for so long, and the Federal Reserve is tightening its interest rates, which does slow down economic activity. Plus, some of this is skewed numbers because we went from a shutdown economy to a roaring economy, and that can only be sustained for so long as you fill that hole. Once that hole fills up, well, you're going to start to see slowed down growth. Although we said that these numbers were revised down, GDP did not go negative, which is the sign of a recession. It just was lower than anticipated. Now, consumer spending, the heart of the economy, is still solid. It grew at a 3.1 annual pace from January through March. Again, the year-over-year numbers are a little bit misleading, but the fact that there was growth still is a good sign. Now, business investment in equipment, software, and other items that are intended to improve productivity rose at a healthy 6.8 annual rate this last quarter as well. So what does this all mean? We got a lot of we have a lot of economic anecdotes that might signal that inflation is actually easing. What does this mean? Well, let's go ahead and talk about that. So the overarching narrative of the markets and economy has been one of strong demand meeting lagging supply. This is what's caused inflation to surge. While most signs suggest that trends continue to persist, a handful of anecdotes from the past week suggest the narrative might be changing. Supply chain disruptions have been reflected by depressed inventories and sales ratios. Many businesses have been complaining that sales would be stronger if only they could keep their shelves stocked. According to the Census Bureau report published on Tuesday, business inventories grew 2.2% in March from the prior month. That means that inventories are starting to come back. The inventory sales ratio improved marginally to 1.27%, but remained lean relative to historic levels. This chart, which we'll go over to now, oops, wrong one. There we go. Let's see, make sure we can see this. Yep. All right. So this chart from Bloomberg's Krit Gupta shows just how aggressively some of the big retailers have been about getting their inventories up. Anecdotally, I can say that this is a thing that a lot of businesses with leverage, with purchasing power, have been doing in order to alleviate their shortages. They have been going to market offering higher than asking price buys for large inventories to move away from just-in-time supply to having a robust supply to prevent further supply chain disruptions from impacting their ability to make goods and services. If big businesses are able to stock their shelves and keep them stocked, then we can see the regain of the 3 to 4 month supply that just-in-time suppliers have typically and historically kept being refilled, and then that will, for lack of a better term, trickle down to small mom and pop area restaurants, and not restaurants, small pop businesses, and they will also be able to have their shelves stocked as well, because once you have 4 months of inventory, 3 or 4 months of inventories built up, you don't need to order as much, which frees up ordering for other businesses. And that's what this chart shows. So what we can see on this chart is that we have the inventory to sales spread jump to the highest on record, which is the gap between the TGT US equities and I think it's the HD US equities. I think it's that gap. It's basically this gap here. I don't know if you can see it's this gap here, and you see how this giant, that's a pretty big gap, right? So this is a good sign. Now, this phenomenon where companies go from being undersupplied to oversupplied is called the bullwhip effect. Bloomberg's Joe Wiesenthal explains, quote, demand booms, companies aggressively order okay, rewind. All right, continuing on, quoting, demand booms, companies aggressively order or even overorder in order to ensure that they have inventories. Then demand shifts. Suddenly fears of shortages and empty shelves turn into inventory pileups, gluts, and disinflation or deflation. This means that because they have inventories that are swelling and they're not able to move product at the prices that they were selling when they bought the product, they take a small loss and sell their products cheaper in order to get rid of the inventory and the overhead costs associated with that inventory, which means prices fall down as a result. Now, because supply chain disruptions, hold on, let me make sure I got this. We're going to keep this up. So let's go back over to this chart. So we have another chart from Bloomberg, and this is showing the supply chain fixes. All right. So these are like the current delivery time diffusion index for Federal Reserve District 3, Philadelphia, current delivery time diffusion index for New York. And as you can see on this chart, you see that it's over the zero line. The zero line is the benchmark line. So if you're over the zero line, it means you're taking a long time to fulfill orders. And as you can see, we hover around, 0-ish, 10-ish. All right. We have around the 10-ish mark, so 10 days or so, 10 to 20 days. And as we entered the pandemic, oh, thank you. Oh, who's raiding? Tiberius, dude, thank you. Thank you for the raid. Thank you, everybody. Welcome. Let's welcome our raiders here. Thank you, everybody from Tiberius D's community, for joining us on the Crowdsourced Politics News Roundup. So if you haven't seen this program before, if you haven't seen me on Tiberius, if you haven't seen me on Tiberius D's Mask Off podcast or any of his other shows, welcome. My name is Cypher. Go by Cypher. You can also call me Anthony, and I am the host and moderator of the Crowdsourced Politics podcast. We do Thursday news roundups every Thursday or thereabouts from roughly 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to roughly 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, covering the news that was of the past week with the kind of analysis only the crowd can provide. So we're on the economy right now and talking about different things. We don't have much more in the podcast left over, but you can check us out on YouTube and get the podcast fully to catch up if you should like. But we're talking right now about the Federal Reserve and supply inventories and the economy in general. So shout out to Changebox for the follow. Greatly appreciate it. And they left us a comment. Get that comment up. So I see Fed charts and I'm a follower. Thank you. We like to do that here. And maybe it isn't me saying, hey, saying over from YouTube, good evening, Cypher and friends. And so if you're watching on YouTube, thank you for watching on YouTube. All right, let us go back over to the chart and I'll re-say some of the stuff I said, but we'll explain it. All right. So this is showing the typical time it takes for a supplier. Let's go ahead and make this bigger. There we go. There we go. This is what it typically takes a supplier to be able to get the goods to market or to the consumer. And as you can see, for the last 3 years or so, since 2018, we're right around the 10-day mark. And as the pandemic came, came in earnest, at least for the United States, around July of 2020. You see the skyrocketing number here, right? It's taking 40 days to get a good to a consumer. Now, this arrow indicates that there is actually a downward shift. And this downward shift is being driven by the last quarter, with this line coming down here. And the reason it's a downward shift is because the average of this line, you can see it clearly, like it's this line here, right? The peaks and troughs, peaks, valleys, troughs, right? Is below 25. And so we're seeing a downward shift. Now, to be clear, this does not mean that the downward shift is going to be sustainable. But as we said earlier in the program, other anecdotal economic indicators are showing that this shift is remaining. So let's move over back to the copy. All right. So as I said, because supply chain disruptions have persisted for longer than many anticipated, the resulting shortages have caused inflation to be much hotter than many had expected. From China shutting down again to prevent in its zero COVID thing, to Russia's war in Ukraine, these things were expected to be starting to be resolved back around March or so, which is why the Federal Reserve started hiking interest rates in March. So what we anticipated, the war in Ukraine and China's shutdown, pushed that out. And I've been saying on this program that we should probably see the impacts of these changes on inflation, the coming back of supply, and the tightening of the Federal Reserve interest rates to see inflation start to go down noticeably, at least either stay stable or actually begin to decrease. In the month over month rate, we still have inflation that we're catching up from 2021, 2020. So you're going to see the year over year rate be, 7, we'll say 6 to 8% for the next few months, right? But the month to month rate, the rate that tracks how much inflation has increased from the previous month, you should see a noticeable decline or stabilization, and therefore decline over time, starting around July or so. That's my opinion. That's what I believe that China's that's what I believe is what we're seeing. Changebox says, and this is a good thing to point out, and so I'm going to go ahead and get it up on the screen here, is that a graph back to 1968 shows that this is an extraordinary bubble. True. We've been in a stock market bubble for the last year, and that's why we're seeing as soon as the Fed tightened up, it started to pop, and we're in a bear market right now. But and then with COVID increasing people's savings and people spending down their savings, it's going to slow the economy. The economy is going to slow. That doesn't mean it will go into a recession where the economy shrinks. We are in correction territory. We're actually in a correction right now. We're in a bear market right now for the stock market, but consumer spending is still fairly strong. And if prices start to come down, which, as I was just saying, I anticipate to be seen or noticeable, maybe not necessarily noticeably seen, but talked about and discussed and by people like us and people that are more in the know, July, August timeframe, then I think we might stave off a recession. Will unemployment increase? Perhaps. But will the economy shrink for any noticeable length of time? I don't think so. That doesn't mean we'll be in a giant upswell, but we'll go back to, the slow increase of GDP, 2 to 3% GDP that we saw over the last 7 years or so, with the blip of the sugar high that we got from the tax cuts that the Trump administration and Republicans passed, ebbing completely. All right, continuing on. And so the Federal Reserve has responded by tightening monetary policy, as we said. Now, they believe that the tighter financial conditions should cool the labor market, which should cool wage growth, which in turn should cool demand to a level that's more in line with supply. This is probably true. Again, these are things that we can anticipate. And if they do it too aggressively, we'll have a hard landing, which is a recession. But they're hoping to basically punch in the nose like we did in the 90s and take it to a smooth sailing. Hopefully that's what happens. Now, the presence of bloated inventories and shorter delivery times would suggest supply chains are no longer a problem or are beginning to be corrected at least. And hiring freezes and layoffs suggest wage growth should cool. Assuming these anecdotes turn into economic trends, inflation should come down soon after. All right, continuing on now, we will be talking about Wall Street going woke. What? Let's talk about it. So the Associated Press reports that Republicans are coming out swinging against Wall Street's growing efforts to consider factors like long-term environmental risk in investment decisions. It's the latest indication that the GOP is willing to damage its relationship with big business to score culture war points. Remember, as we've been saying on this program for a while now, politics is downstream from culture, and the default position is for culture to trump economics unless there is a problem. Thanks, Dragon Dice, for the follow. So that's what we're seeing. We're seeing things come to its natural state again, where culture trumps economics. So many of these Republicans are targeting the concept known as ESG, which stands for environmental, social, and governance, a sustainable investment trend sweeping the financial world. Now, this trend, thanks, Tiberius, appreciate it, buddy. Love you too, dude. I need to get back on your program, man. I need to get back on the Mask Off podcast. It's just a shame I've been busy over the last couple of weeks. Oops, there it goes. All right, continuing on with the copy though. So it should be noted that ESG is a market response to what the market believes people want. Over the last 20 years, there's been a push to go back to stakeholder capitalism. Stakeholder capitalism is a capitalism that takes into account the desires of not just shareholders, but stakeholders. That means workers, the environment, the communities in which businesses exist in, the shareholders as well, and governments, all coming together to shape company policy and do what communities kind of want and fit into that sort of thing, right? And this was pretty much blown out of the water by Milton Friedman back in the 70s. We went from a stakeholder economy to a shareholder economy, and a shareholder economy means that only the desires of shareholders should be treated as the proper function of business, and that means increasing profits to give shareholders more money. With the change in the trend, especially among millennials and Zoomers, and younger Gen Xers, for that matter, we saw ESG come into play. And that's where we're at right now. It's just the market reacting to what the market, it's just businesses reacting to what they believe the market desires. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's just change in, I guess, cultural or business direction being pushed by shareholders and stakeholders alike. So now red state officials deride it as a political correct and woke, and are trying to stop investors who contract with states from adopting it on any level. For right-wing activists who previously spun the culture wars of criticisms against critical race theory, diversity, equity, inclusion, and social emotional learning, ESG is the latest acronym-based source of outrage that's gaining traction at rallies in conservative media and in legislatures. Why is that the case? Well, ESG tends to target bigger businesses that don't follow stakeholder economy and don't have the, well, target is the wrong word. What's a better way to say this? Companies that don't have a environmental action plan, or companies that pollute a lot, are going to rank lower on ESG rating systems, which numerous ones of them exist. You can look them up. They're pretty public. They're not, I mean, again, personally, I think ESGs are just a scam to blink people out of money for their desire for a more just world. But that doesn't mean that this is a conspiracy theory to force liberal lefty culture on everybody else. This is, again, businesses reacting to what they believe the market wants, and a desire of people to make money on top of that. But it means that they rank lower on these ratings, and which means their stocks aren't kept in as many funds, and that reduces the price of stock. And if you're like ExxonMobil or Shell, or I don't know, a mining company that just chucks its coal ash into the river, you're going to look lower on this, and that's going to cost you some money, possibly. That's why they're against it. So ESG has yet to take hold as a mainstream political message, but backlash against it is picking up steam. And if you've been on any political sites in the last 3 or 4 weeks, you're seeing that ESG is being attacked from right-wing pundits and people who are against the idea of doing anything because they say it's a Chinese-like social credit system or some other such bullshit. Don't believe it. They don't know what they're talking about. Again, it's just they don't like that some of this stuff is increasing diversity, making companies be more environmentally stable or resilient, whatever. And they don't like the fact that they're actually going around what communities in these places want, because it lowers the amount of shareholder profit. So with that, last week, former Vice President Mike Pence attacked the concept during a speech in Houston. And on Wednesday, the same day he said on Twitter he planned to vote Republican, Elon Musk attacked it after Tesla lost its place on the S&P 500 ESG index. He called it a scam weaponized by phony social justice warriors. I believe that it is mostly a scam. It is not a scam by phony social justice warriors. It's a scam by capitalists exploiting those social justice warriors for cash. That's what I think it is. Not everybody's going to agree with me. I get that, but that's where I think we're actually at with this. So the concept calls on investors to consider criteria such as environmental risk, pay equity, or of how transparent companies are in their accounting practices, and also whether they treat their workers fairly, how what their company looks like, etc. Now, aided by proposed disclosure requirements and analysis from rating agencies, they have adopted the principles to such an extent that those who use them control 16.6 trillion in investments held in the United States. In response, Republicans, historically known for supporting fewer regulations, are in many places attempting to impose new rules on investors, because again, it's about the culture. They don't want the culture to move away from what they used to, or things that they disagree with, such as like giving trans people more giving trans people rights in general. And so they're going to attack these things because they feel it is an impediment to their cultural proclivities. So their efforts reflect how members of the party are willing to distance themselves from big business to push back against those that they see as ideological foes. Quote, "I don't think we're the party of big business anymore. We're the party of people. More specifically, we're the party of working people. And the people that we have is with the problem we have is with big banks and corporations right now, trying to dictate how we're going to live our lives," West Virginia Treasurer Riley Moore said. Now, this is bullshit, okay? Trans people, people of color, people, gay people, women, etc., are working class people. Remember, everybody that works for a living is working class. They're using party of working people as a stand-in for what they mean, which is a party of this traditional American blue-collar, rugged individualist that works hard for a fair day's pay, but not really a fair day's pay, and thinks all the cultural shit that they think. That's what they're talking about, not this other stuff. Now, continuing on, opponents criticize ESG as politicized and a potentially costly diversion from purely financial investment principles. Purely financial investment principles are an aberration of what the United States has stood for. As we stated earlier, it's only been in existence since the 70s. Now, advocates say considering the criteria more accurately accounts for risk and promises steadier returns. Quote, "We focus on sustainability not because we're environmentalists, but because we're capitalists and fiduciaries to our client," Larry Fink, CEO investment firm BlackRock and a leading proponent, told clients in a letter this year. This makes logical sense as well. The reason being, you can't make money if the planet is dying and humans are dying off with it. So if you don't take into account climate change in your businesses and you try to decarbonize your own business to help alleviate climate change, well, in the long run, you're going to make less money. So there's that. So, but Moore and others, including Utah Republican State Treasurer Marlo Oaks, argued favoring green investment over fossil fuels denies key industries access to the financial system and capital. I mean, probably true, but is that a bad thing? Again, they're capitalist, right? Capitalism, the way capitalism has been used in the United States typically means market, free market. And this is, again, the market reacting to itself. So this shouldn't be a bad thing and they shouldn't be against us. Remember, it's a culture, stupid. They worry that without changes, their scores could make borrowing for projects like schools or roads costlier. In an April letter, Oaks demanded S&P retract an analysis that rated Utah as moderately negative in terms of environmental risk due to its long-term challenges regarding water supply, which could remain a constraint for its economy, given the persistent drought conditions in the western U.S. The letter was co-signed by the governor, legislative leaders, and the state's congressional delegation, including Senator Mitt Romney, whose former firm Bain Capital calls ESG factors strategic, fact-based, and diligence-driven. It said that the rating systems, quote, attempt to legitimize a dubious and unproven exercise, and it attacks the, quote, unreliability and inherently political nature of ESG factors in investment decisions. Everything's political. Like, business is political. I don't know what else to say about this. Now, though he likened ESG to critical race theory, Oaks said that he was mostly concerned with capital markets and what he called attempts by fossil fuel opponents to manipulate them by pressuring investors to pick businesses with high ESG scores. Again, this isn't manipulation. People want this. That's why it's created. It makes investors. It makes hedge funds. It makes the bankers money because people wanted it. And if they can create a score that people want, it's going to help them. And never mind the fact that it can be gamed by these same companies to get a higher score by, I don't know, investing $2 million into planting trees or some other such bullshit. Again, that's why I consider this a scam. It's not a scam because of that sort of, it's not a scam because of what they're saying. It's a scam for other reasons, capitalistic ones. Now, Continuing on, though it's drawing enthusiasm, the green investment discourse differs from recurring debates over gender and sexuality or how history is taught. Both proponents and detractors acknowledge that their surprised pensions, credit ratings, and investment decisions have become campaign rally fodder. Last month at the Utah State's Party Convention, thousands of Republicans roared when Senator Mike Lee described green investments in similar terms to critical race theory, another acronym based oil. Now, anybody that has been as engaged politically as long as I have would know that there are books that right-wing proponents have written at the behest and pay for fossil industry with titles such as "Green is the New Red." Okay, this isn't new. What is new is that it finally has reached critical mass, that it becomes a common talking point outside of fringe Fox News business pundits talking about it, and it's now into the mainstream. Quote, though, between CRT and ESG and MSNBC, we get way too much BS, Lee said. Now, Brian McGannon, a lobbyist with USSIF, the Forum for Sustainable and Responsible Investment, said that if states refuse to reckon with how the future will likely rely less on fossil fuels and limit how environmental risk can be considered, they're making decisions with incomplete information. Quote, if states not considering those risks, it may be a signal to an investor that this might not be a wise government to be putting our money with, McGannon said. Investors use a huge swath of information, and ESG is a piece of that mosaic. So again, this is typical partisan stuff. They're worried that the money trough's gonna turn off and they're gonna lose power. Oh wow, we're going for a long time today. All right. You know what? I'm actually gonna have to cut it here. Sorry, Nikki. I ranted a little bit too much about the shootings. So for those that may not know, who have been joined, who are just joining the news roundup for the first time, we like to end our program with a little segment called News of the Weird. News of the Weird is what we like to end our program as a palate cleanser and something funny or interesting that we find on the news that happened recently and bring it to y'all to share in its glory. And today we have a news segment on jumping worms. Let's go ahead and watch it. All right, let's start this over.
Finally tonight, gardeners beware. Whether you call them Alabama jumpers or Jersey wrigglers, invasive jumping worms have been spotted in at least 34 states. Aaron Hassanzadeh of our Minneapolis station WCCO has the latest.
Ever heard of jumping worms?
No, I have not.
What are they? I've never heard of them. Something else to worry about.
Have you ever seen one?
I've never seen one, no.
The name alone is enough to make your skin crawl.
They don't sound too good.
But just watch, and it may push you over the edge.
Oh wow,
Here's a video.
that's weird.
No. Okay. No. They look more like the S animal.
Once like you disturb them, they start jumping and they do like snake-like moves.
That would freak me out.
Yeah, I know.
Oh wow,
It's
that's
like
weird.
a nightcrawler on steroids.
And even if that video didn't disturb you, this might.
It's destroying the ground really quick.
Not something you want to find.
Oh wow.
Probably not.
Jumping worms eat their way through your soil, slithering like a snake, and they leave it looking more like this. Like coffee grounds, raising erosion concerns and hurting the health of your plants. But there are a few things you can do.
All right, we're gonna call it there because we don't want to use too much of a news segment and get caught up by the copyright lords. But that's very interesting. So we have an environmental a worm that is destroying soil and creating erosion because of the way it eats through the soil, creating a powdery like dust that endangers erosion and causes soil decay and endangers gardens everywhere. If these worms get beyond the borders of Arizona and into other places, we could see it could potentially make the ability to grow plants and food harder. So that's why we wanted to share it with y'all. But with that, I am sad to say that we are out of time. We'd like to thank you, everybody that joined us, especially the Tiberius D for rating into the channel. Thank you, buddy. We really do appreciate it, and it helps us out. So hey, if this is your first time, go ahead and smash that like button, especially if you stayed with us to the end, because we know that you enjoyed what you heard. So please do that. It does help us with the algorithms. If you liked what you heard, though, we also do other podcasts. We do Cipher State, which is Foreign Affairs and Foreign Policy podcast. Tiberius D has been a member of that a few times. And we do another podcast called Praxis Run, which interviews people that put their theory into action or practice, otherwise known as Praxis. And we're going to have our second episode on June 7th at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Join the Discord. We're trying to build up our community at Discord, and we're going to have contests and that sort of thing and that sort of stuff. We gave away a thing that looked kind of like this, pinatagram, to a winner of one of our contests from the Facebook group. We also gave away a beer stein that had the Crowdsourced Politics logo on it, and like first annual winner of predicting the presidential election kind of thing. So we did that. There was no entry fee. People just needed to submit a map, and if their map was the closest to winning without going over, they won. And somebody even predicted Georgia would flip blue. So there is that kind of people who come into our community. And special thanks to our copy editor and producer, Nikki Adams. Without her, this would not be as of a robust news program as it is today. So Nikki, thank you. Now, if you're watching us on Twitch, please stick around for a second. We will go raid into somebody. We're going to raid into Prime Kai. Prime Kai is a good dude. He does a lot of good content. And so we're going to go ahead and give him the views. And as always, as we say at Crowdsourced Politics, keep your head up through the political storm.